Hi, my name is Amalia Sremani, and I conducted a study on queer flirting and courtship. So my biggest motivator was the need for representation in research. The majority of the research on flirting habits and initiation of relationships is done primarily on cis heterosexual people. So I wanted to contribute work that was more inclusive of genders and sexual orientations and potentially discover if there were differences in how they approached romantic interests. We can't assume that heteronormative practices are generalizable to all genders and sexual orientations. So, most of the research conducted used self report surveys and interviews to find that gender was a consistent predictor of flirting behaviors, while sexual orientation's effect was negligible. Some of those gender differences were that women were more likely to employ traditional, physical, polite, and sincere styles of flirting, while men were more likely to be playful. There was conflicting evidence on the effect of sexual orientation and flirting, but most of the differences in approach to flirting by sexual orientation were not statistically significant. However, in one study, they found that gay men tended to take a sexually forward approach to flirting, and lesbians took a more intimacy based approach. Both gay and lesbian flirting scripts were also free of many other aspects of traditional heterosexual roles. It's also important to consider that perhaps non binary queer people might also not follow a traditional flirting script. Here, I highlight more differences of how people of different sexual orientation attitudes may influence their behavior. So, bisexual women had more open attitudes and behaviors about sociosexuality across cultures than did straight and lesbian women. Um, Committed gay and lesbian people tend to practice egalitarianism by including equality in the division of roles and responsibilities and in terms of relationship maintenance efforts. This division of roles is likely due to same-sex couples' reliance on friendship and the basis for the relationship. Um, Lesbians are also found to practice egalitarian dating habits and reject or modify contemporary heterosexual practices. And even among queer individuals, gender role expectations and stereotypes are still present, where they find that gay men are at the forefront of representation as hypersexualized, and women's sexuality goes unnoticed, whether they are straight or gay. In my study, I conducted a preliminary descriptive research study into the flirting habits of primarily LGBTQIA plus adults. Again, the purpose of the study was to collect data on what specific actions members of this community take to communicate their romantic and/or sexual interest in a partner. And I wanted to contribute to the existing flirting research while considering a more inclusive, gender-neutral, and diverse sample of participants. So I used snowball sampling. There were 96 participants, all adults. I sent out an anonymous Qualtrics survey link that was sent from the Wagman Laboratory and shared on social media platforms such as Instagram and Facebook. I collected demographic information and had participants fill out a 21-item survey adapted from the Basic Behavioral Questionnaire by Garza. And then I had an optional text-based last question asking them to list their own flirting habits in their own words, and it was all rated on a 5-point Likert scale. The majority of the participants were white, women, non-heterosexual, college-educated, single adults. They were informed of the purpose of the study, that their participation was voluntary, told them about the confidentiality measures that I took, the potential benefits. There was no compensation except for students at the University of Baltimore who received credit for their psychology courses. The whole study lasted about 5 to 8 minutes, and the data was collected through Qualtrics, then downloaded to SPSS for analysis. So this is the graph of the gender demographic breakdown. As you see, it's mostly women, but a good portion of non-cis people. This is the sexual orientation demographics, and it's mostly queer identifying people. This is a list of all of the questions that I asked on the survey. Some of the questions were: I used humor, I gave them compliments, I used physical contact, I maintained eye contact as just some of the behaviors of flirting that people might employ. And then for the results, I ran a one-way ANOVA on all flirting habits as a function of gender, and the only significant overall effect was gender on the flirting behavior of play fighting. So the mean value of play fighting was significantly different between men and women and between men and non-binary people. Again, I ran a one-way ANOVA on all flirting habits as a function of sexual orientation, and the only marginally significant overall effect was sexual orientation on the flirting behavior of gift giving. So the mean value of gift giving was marginally significantly different between lesbians and straights. For the last optional text-based question where I allowed people to describe in their own words how they flirt, I created a word cloud to demonstrate the habits they most often reported. You can see here that joking, eye contact, and banter were the most commonly reported tactics. The results show that when analyzing flirting habits by gender, men were less likely than women and non-binary people to engage in play fighting. And though there were no significant results for sexual orientation on flirting habits, it is still interesting to note that gift giving was marginally significant, so that lesbians give more gifts than straight people. And this was consistent with the research assertions that gender plays a significant role in flirting and courtship behaviors. Some of the limitations were a low participant sample, it was less diverse, the self-report measures, only 21 questions in the survey. Other flirting inventories could have been used to gather information about flirting scripts and attitudes. The quantitative demographic data collection did not necessarily allow for nuance if people made more than one selection for gender or sexual orientation. And there was an inability to establish cause and effect relationships since there's a limited scope on the data collected. For future research, they should study into not only actions and behaviors, but also attitudes and beliefs about dating among queer identifying people. They should study long-term queer relationships to see how their attitudes and actions change over time in committed relationships, and study cross-culturally and of diverse demographic backgrounds. These are my references. And a huge thank you again to Dr. Eisel for the countless meetings and counsel and helping me every step of the way through this research project. Thank you to Mike Keel and Dr. Farley for helping me find articles and teaching me how to search more effectively. Thank you, Ms. Carson, for the statistics classes and teaching me SPSS. And that's everything. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Round of applause. Woo!